And yet another very wonderful, wonderful morning out there to all of you, my dear friends. We have come to the very closing chapter of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 52. And this is basically a summary of the book of Jeremiah itself. Let's just get right into it. Zedekiah, the final king of the Jews before the captivity, the final king of the Davidic line of the Jews ever. Since until Christ comes back, this is the final guy. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done, Jehoiakim his brother before him. Zedekiah owed his throne to the king of Babylon, and at first was his obedient vassal, himself going to Babylon, as we read in the previous chapter, and swearing allegiance in Ezekiel 17:13, but rebellion soon followed, and the perjured young king once more pursued the fatal, fascinating policy of alliance with Egypt. And through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, till he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and built forts against it round about. This was about a year and a half before they were taken into captivity. So the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And in the 4th month, in the 9th day of the month, the famine was sore in the city, so that there was no bread for the people of the land. And in the book of Lamentation, Jeremiah wrote about this. He said, Arise, cry out in the night, in the beginning of the watches, pour out thine heart like water before the face of the Lord. Lift up thy hands toward him for the life of thy young children, that faint for hunger in the top of every street. There were people in the streets just starving to death, probably just desiring someone to give them something to eat. Behold, O Lord, and consider to whom thou hast done this. Shall the women eat their fruit, and children of a span long? Because the women would cook their babies. Shall the priest and the prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? Then the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled, and went forth out of the city by night, by the way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden. Now the Chaldeans were by the city round about, and they went by the way of the plain. So Zedekiah, he escapes. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued after the king, and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. Now catch this. But in the plains of Jericho, not far at all from Jerusalem, about I think 15 miles or so, something like that. Not far. But right there is where Zedekiah the king is captured by Nebuchadnezzar's men. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, he himself is located up here in Riblah. One of the commentators commented on him being captured at Jericho and the bitter irony of the thing. It seems ironic that here, at the very spot where Israel first set foot on the promised land, the last of the Davidic kings was captured and his monarchy scattered. Here, where Israel experienced her first victory as the walls of Jericho fell before unarmed men who trusted God, was the scene of her last defeat. It all made a full circle right back to this very spot. Then they took the king and carried him up unto the king of Babylon to Riblah in the land of Hamath, where he gave judgment upon him. And the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. He slew also all the princes of Judah in Riblah. Then he put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and the king of Babylon bound him in chains, and carried him to Babylon, and put him in prison till the day of his death. Now, once again, we've already went over this. The whole reason why the city of Jerusalem, God's temple, it was all destroyed, plus the people starved, and countless deaths are the cause of this man right here and his fear of the people. He didn't want to surrender, like Jeremiah kept preaching to him. Just surrender, save the city, save the people, God desired all of it to be preserved. He just wanted them to stop their idolatry. But because of this king's hard heart, so much horrible other things happened. And now we see the judgment really coming upon him. His sons are killed right in front of him. That's the last thing that he sees. And then his eyes are pulled out, as we went over, not burned out, but pulled out in the actual language. And then he's carried away blind into Babylon till the day of his death is he in prison. Now in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, which served the king of Babylon, into Jerusalem, and burned the house of the Lord, Solomon's temple, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and all the houses of the great man burned he with fire. Now this was 1 month after, we've already went over this, but this is 1 month after they actually took the king and took the people captive. And it's believed because they had to, after they had taken the city, they had to make their way all the way up to Riblah, ask Nebuchadnezzar what he wanted to be done to the city. Nebuchadnezzar said, burn it all. And then they had to come back. That took probably about a month for them to do. And all the army of the Chaldeans that were with the captain of the guard brake down all the walls of Jerusalem round about. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive certain of the poor of the people, and the residue of the people that remained in the city, and those that fell away, that fell to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude. Why did they choose certain ones and not others? The multitude, it speaks right here, possibly workmen. The object of Nebuchadnezzar was to people Babylon, to bring these captives there. Not with paupers, but with men of a better class, artisans and workmen who would enrich it. Anyone in whom Nebuchadnezzar saw great potential in, then he took them captive, like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Ezekiel. But Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left certain of the poor of the land for vine dressers and for husbandmen. That tells us the reason why some of the poor were left there. It was to keep the fields fertile and such. Also the pillars of brass that were in the house of the Lord, and the bases, and the brazen sea that was in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans brake, and carried all the brass of them to Babylon. Now this wasn't the first time that the temple was ransacked, if you'll remember, in a previous captivity, because once again there were 3 captivities that Nebuchadnezzar enacted upon the Jews. The temple was rifled of its riches and furniture at several times. The first was when Nebuchadnezzar came up against Jehoiakim. Daniel 1:2, you can read about that. The second time was at the captivity of Jeconiah. Jeremiah 27:19, 2 Kings 24. And now at the final destruction of the city and temple, they made a clear riddance of all its ornaments. The cauldrons also, and the shovels, and the snuffers, and the bowls, and the spoons, and all the vessels of brass wherewith they ministered, took they away. And the basins, and the fire pans, and the bowls, and the cauldrons, and the candlesticks, and the spoons, and the cups, that which was of gold in gold, and that which was of silver in silver, took the captain of the guard away. The 2 pillars, 1 sea, and 12 basin bowls that were under the bases, which King Solomon had made in the house of the Lord. The brass of all these vessels was without weight. And concerning the pillars, the height of 1 pillar was 18 cubits, and a fillet of 12 cubits did compass it, and the thickness thereof was 4 fingers, it was hollow. And a chapiter of brass was upon it, and the height of 1 chapiter was 5 cubits, with network and pomegranates, which would be round up through here. Upon the chapiters round about, all of brass. The second pillar also, and the pomegranates were like unto these, and there were 96 pomegranates on a side, and all the pomegranates upon the network were 100 round about. And the captain of the guard took Seraiah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the door. So he's already took the temple, that's no more, and now he's taken the priest of the temple. He took also out of the city a eunuch, which had the charge of the men of war, and 7 men of them that were near the king's person, which were found in the city, and the principal scribe of the host, who mustered the people of the land, and 80 men of the people of the land that were found in the midst of the city. So Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon to Riblah. And the king of Babylon smote them and put them to death in Riblah in the land of Hamath. Thus Judah was carried away captive out of his own land. Isn't it something? These had all of them heard Jeremiah preach on numerous occasions. They were well aware of the message. Nebuchadnezzar's going to take this city. You're going to be taken captive. Many of you are going to be put to death. And now they stand before Nebuchadnezzar, and he issues the order, put them to death. And all of a sudden they know we should have listened to Jeremiah. This so sounds like the lost on Judgment Day. They had possessed this land for some 860 years at this point. They took it by faith and obedience, but they lost it through idolatry and sin. And let this be a message to all the other nations, especially the United States of America. Just look at how far we've fallen. Look at who our leader is. I mean, what a joke. This is the people whom Nebuchadnezzar carried away captive. In the 7th year, 3,000 Jews and 320. So that's 3,023 Jews. That's in the 7th year. In the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, he carried away captive from Jerusalem 832 persons, 832. In the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, though, in the final captivity, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive of the Jews 745 persons. Notice the number kept going down and down and down because people were dying. They already starved to death. They had already taken the best. By the end, they were just a fraction of their former selves anyway. All the persons were 4,600. The total number, including the 10,000, who are not mentioned here, but it is mentioned they're mentioned in 2 Kings 24, mounts up to 14,600. In Ezra 2, the number of those who returned from Babylon is given at 42,000. Now that's after 70 years of them being taken captive. There should have been a lot more. Besides 7,000 male and female slaves, and this, as many remain behind in Babylon, is more than can be accounted for by the natural increase of the population. Now, where are the rest of them? We are led to the conclusion that after the exiles were settled in Babylon and found themselves in a more favorable position than was at first anticipated, oh, well, this place isn't that bad. They were joined by friends and kindred who hoped to be better off there than in the desolation and disorders of their own country. Well, we don't want to go back to Jerusalem. You know, that's nothing but dust and dirt now. Here we have food. It's just like people wanting to stay in Egypt. And it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. So in the 37th year after Jehoiakim had been taken captive, and it would do for us to have a refresher. Who is Jehoiakim? He is the king right before Zedekiah. He only reigned for 3 months. He was the son of Jehoiakim. All of these three are brothers. Jehoaz, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, they're all brothers. But Jehoiakim, he was the son of Jehoiakim, the nephew of the final king. All of these, though, come from Josiah, who was the only and the final good king that they actually had. Now, keep in context, this verse right here is years and years later from the verses we just went over. They're already over halfway through their captivity at this point. They're at the middle point of it. And Nebuchadnezzar's dead. His son, Evil-Merodach, is upon the throne. And it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, in the 25th day of the month, the 25th day of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the 1st year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of prison. I like this guy, let's bring him on out. Now, there must have been something about the character of Jehoiakim. He was a young king whenever he first began, and by this point, he's kind of getting to be an old man whenever he's finally let out of prison. But there must have been something about his personality that was kind of magnetic to people, because the people of the land, they desired Jehoiakim to be brought back out of captivity and to rule over them. And even the false prophets spoke of, well, Jehoiakim, he'll come back if you'll remember. But Nebuchadnezzar's son, he's very taken by him, and he brings him out of prison, and he spake kindly unto him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings. Ain't that something? He gave him back position of power that were with him in Babylon, and changed his prison garments, and he did continually eat bread before him all the days of his life. And for his diet there was a continual diet given him, the king of Babylon, every day a portion until the day of his death, all the days of his life. Captured kings were kept at the court of their conqueror, to perpetuate the memory of his triumph, as well as for security against rebellion. Babylon was the greatest empire the world had ever known at that time, and just as Nebuchadnezzar so flattered himself, the kings would naturally desire the title King of Kings. That would make that king a literal King of Kings. Setting up the kings of their conquered nations under them would have further validated this title. So there we have it, my dear friends. The book of the prophet Jeremiah. Quite possibly, given all that he went through, all that he suffered, all the assassination plots against him, all the time they actually tried to kill him, they cast him into a pit, they mocked him. He was facing false prophets on a daily. He was at the most tumultuous time that the Jews have ever been at, the most idolatrous time that they had ever been at. And God sustained this man for 40 years to preach. Even in the womb of Jeremiah's mother did he ordain him and make him a prophet unto the nations, not just to the Jews, but to all the nations. Remember how we went over how Jeremiah, whenever he had the stalks on his shoulders, he sent the same message out to all the nations round about. He also wrote, we just went over in the previous Bible studies, he also wrote the judgments of God upon all these nations representing the whole world, as well as Babylon herself. If you haven't watched the Babylon studies, I strongly recommend that, what Jeremiah had written about that. You'll see how Revelation refers back to what Jeremiah said so many times, more than any other in the Old Testament prophets. Just so fascinating. Jesus, he would often quote the prophet Jeremiah. Fascinating, fascinating man. He's actually called by many of the commentators, as G. Campbell Morgan, the most heroic prophet of the Old Testament. The most heroic. I hope that you all have found a new appreciation and respect for the prophet Jeremiah. I know I have. Before I got into this study, I knew a little bit about the man, but not very much. Anyway, I thank you all for joining me, my dear friends. This has been a very, very real pleasure for my life. I thank you all. Lord willing, we're going to be getting into the book of Isaiah here next week. God, peace be with you. Amen.